Hi, my name is David Nethery. I'm president of Air for Arts, and I welcome you to this segment of Storytime. Air for Arts inspires and nurtures the development of emerging artists and innovators through educational programs and mentoring resources. The organization also helps established creatives to enhance their professional and entrepreneurial skills. Finally, Air for Arts offers a digital platform through which to share the fruits of creatives' efforts within the community. I just think of Air for Arts as a greenhouse for creative endeavor. It takes a spark of imagination and nurtures it, encourages it, and helps it to grow to the point that it blossoms. A Story Time is a new offering by Air for Arts, focusing on the storytelling tradition, both oral and written. And for this year, we have selected a series of children's books written by Nancy Churnin, and we feature Nancy one book each month throughout the year. Nancy's books are delightfully educational and informative, and they appeal to children of all ages. Susan Morrow is the executive director of Air for Arts, and it is her honor to introduce Nancy and her special guest for today's session. So, Susan?
Thank you, David. My delightful pleasure to introduce Nancy and her special guest, Eric Nadel, for an insightful conversation about Nancy's book, The William Boyce Story. William was the first deaf baseball player in the major leagues and prompted significant changes to America's pastime. For those of you, many have heard of Eric Nadel, who is in his 26th year as the lead voice on the Texas Rangers baseball radio broadcast. He is the 2014 recipient of the Ford C. Frick Award that is presented annually for excellence in broadcasting by the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum. Eric brings unique reflections to today's conversation with Nancy, since he actually knew William Boyce personally. Let us welcome Nancy Churnin and Eric Nadel.
Thank you so much, Susan, and thank you, David. It's so great to be here, and I love being here for story time and sharing these stories. And this is a perfect book for now. It's Deaf History Month, and I'm so happy to celebrate the story of this great deaf baseball player. I can tell you a little bit about it, but I also want to jump right in and thank Eric, because Eric was a great help to me with this book. I had two people who were my main sources of help with this. One was Steve Sandy, who is deaf and a friend of the Boyce family. And Steve has, oh my goodness, memorabilia you wouldn't believe, has saved every article that's ever been written about William Boyce. And he also gave me an education in what it was like to be deaf, and particularly in the 19th century, which is when William did most of his playing. He played 14 years and he retired in 1902. Isn't that right, Eric?
That's right. He actually then played a couple of years in the minor leagues after he got done playing in the majors, which was not unusual in those days. Players didn't make that much money if they could be playing for a couple of years, even in the minor leagues. Get beat going back to work in a factory or on the farm.
I know, it's amazing. And if he did have a farm, because he's one of the unusual baseball players who actually saved all his money. He bought a farm afterwards. I mean, he really broke down barriers. I wrote this to fulfill the dream of my friend Steve Sandy, who was deaf and wanted kids to know about this great deaf baseball player. Actually, one of Steve's dreams is for William Boyce to get in the National Baseball Hall of Fame. And one thing I wanted to share about you, and we don't read the whole book, but we show some of it, is, William Boyce, they said he grew up deaf. At a time, there was a lot of prejudice against deaf people. And baseball was a brand new game. He wanted to play it more than anything else. And they said, William, how can you play? First of all, you're too small and you can't hear the umpire. So the first thing, when you're too small, what can you do to get better? He practiced and practiced and practiced till he was better than the big kids. What did he do about being deaf, not hearing the umpire? This is where he teaches the umpires his language, sign language. Say and out is American Sign Language. So he taught the umpires, and once the umpires started using sign language, all of a sudden he starts getting on bases, he scores, he becomes one of the most celebrated players of his time. So as I said, one of my great helps for this book was Steve Sandy, who's a friend of the Hoy family. And the other one is Eric, who knows everything there is to know about baseball. As a matter of fact, one of the things I dedicated myself to doing is writing about people that most kids don't know about and sharing their stories. Well, guess who knew everything about William Hoy? Most people will say, William who? And can you spell it? But when I asked my friend Eric, of course, he knew everything about William Hoy. When I said, Eric, can I check these statistics with you to make sure that I'm presenting him accurately, that he was the king of center field? Is that okay to say? And Eric was so helpful and even wrote the blurb to the back of the book. And I'm really so thankful to you, Eric, because it was very important to me that we get the story right. And you knew about him and you admired him. And you also made me feel good about this journey I was taking to tell this story.
Truly unique story. Even if he had not been deaf, what he did as a major league player was a list of tremendous accomplishments. The game was very different back then. They called it the dead ball era. There weren't a lot of home runs. A greater premium was placed on the other aspects of the game. In his case, as you mentioned, he was very small, probably around 5'6". You see conflicting statistics in baseball record books, but probably around 5'6". So he wasn't big and strong and hitting a lot of home runs. So he learned to do all of the other things that help teams win games. He got a lot of walks. He actually took advantage of his diminutive size by getting a lot of walks. He got hit by a lot of pitches, which also gets you a free pass. And then he stole a lot of bases. So naturally, he scored a lot of runs without even hitting home runs or even other extra base hits. And then defensively, he was a standout. He was very fast. So he covered a lot of ground in center field, and he had a tremendous throwing arm. So he was a very complete player, with the exception of that one skill, power, that not that many players had back then anyway.
And even though he wasn't a power player, we did establish that he did hit a grand slam, right? In the, let me see where that was. He hits a grand slam in for the Chicago White Stockings, as they were called.
They were actually the pennant winner in the very first year of the American League in 1901. They won the pennant, and William Hoy was their center fielder, and he was already well up in his 30s at the time.
Yeah, it was incredible. There were so many stories about him too, right? There was a case when he caught the ball by jumping on a buggy or a horse that was in the field, because at that time you had the horses in the field. And the other thing, though, that I just think was so extraordinary and made me want to write about William Hoy was he had a reputation for being honest and a really good guy. He was the kind of person who would tell the truth. If that ball hit the ground and he didn't catch it, he would tell you that. He would or sign it. He would let you know. And he was known for his honesty, for treating people right. And he really built bridges between the deaf and the hearing communities, didn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the teams he played for, the Louisville Colonels, was a team that was apparently very tight as almost a communal unit, and they all learned sign language. He taught all of them. And, for that to happen in an era when a deaf player was called dummy, and, people were not giving handicapped people the sort of opportunities they have now, it just tells you, how beloved he was and how much people warmed up to him, because of all the personal qualities that he had, in addition to being such an excellent athlete.
Oh, I'm so glad you brought that up, Eric. And, one of the things that I did in the book was that I showed in the beginning how his mother would cheer him. This is deaf applause, right? So this is deaf applause. And then later in the book, when he gets this idea he's being humiliated at first because before the sign language is used, I mean, it's very easy to fast pitch him because he's too far away to know if it's a ball or a strike. He's standing up there waiting for a pitch. He doesn't know he's struck out. But he remembers his mom cheering for him, and it gives him the idea to teach the umpire sign language. That's how it's in the book. And at the end, he's so beloved that, he always says he'll never cry about baseball. He's going to be a tough guy.
No crying in baseball, yeah.
No crying in baseball. But when he comes out in the field, and this picture was actually in the New York Times when they reviewed it, and it's in the Mazza Museum of Children's Book Illustration. Look at what they're all doing. All these people at the ball field, they're all wearing their top hats and their coats and ties, because that's how you dressed for baseball back then. But look what they're doing with their hands. He would come out and they would do this, right? Even the wave that we do now is like deaf applause. And so we're still doing that. And he's, and that, again, that shows how beloved he was. And to repeat what Eric said, there was a lot of prejudice at that time. Why was he called Dummy? This guy was a valedictorian in his high school. He was so smart, but they called everybody dummy who couldn't speak, and so everybody who was deaf was called by this name. And so I chose not to use that name in the book itself, but in the back matter, I do explain that, because if you look at the baseball encyclopedia, that's how you're going to see him, right? As Dummy Hoy.
Apparently, he signed autographs as Dummy Hoy. It wasn't necessarily considered to be derogatory. It was just descriptive in those days, and and even deaf people at that time, thought it was okay to be referred to in that manner, or he certainly wouldn't have signed his name that way.
I agree, and I also believe that this may have been one of the reasons why he, unlike some of his teammates, like Clark Griffiths and Connie Mack, people he played with, they got into the Hall of Fame, but he didn't. And I think there was a lot of prejudice not only against deaf people, but against signing, because there was actually a whole controversy about, should deaf people sign or should they speak? Well, he didn't speak, I think later when he married his wife, who was also deaf and a teacher for the deaf, she actually taught him to speak a few words, which is challenging for people who can't hear. But also there's a choice that there are many deaf people who choose not to speak because it's not their language. But what I'm saying is that I think that one of the reasons he didn't get into the hall when he should have was because of this prejudice. And now my friend Steve Sandy is trying to revive people's memories of him and all he accomplished and what a great player he was and a great human being. And Steve and I'm supporting this, started a letter writing campaign. We're trying to get people to write to the National Baseball Hall of Fame to ask for him to be inducted there.
Yeah, I think there's a greater appreciation for some of the things he was able to do as a fielder. There are more ways of measuring a player's defensive performance now with all of the advanced analytical tools they have now in baseball. They can actually go back and look at the game records of all those games and rate him statistically in areas that they couldn't before, which makes it more and more clear, what an outstanding defensive player he was. Defense is the hardest thing in baseball to measure. How many fly balls a guy caught isn't good enough because you don't know how many were hit. It's more a matter of how much range you have, and he had plenty of that. And there are ways now of calculating that didn't exist, even 5 and 10 years ago.
Well, I sure hope that they take that into account when they consider future inductions. So he had that reputation in center. If he was in center field, and that's a big area to cover, right? Center field, tough position.
Yeah, and generally, at least one of the other outfielders is usually pretty slow, and the center fielder is, he has the job of kind of covering more than just one field. And you add to that the fact that he had that great throwing arm. He still holds the record for throwing out runners at home plate. In one game, he threw out 3 at home plate in one game, which is amazing that they would continue to take the chance. But he was very accurate. And, that's the sort of thing, too, that I think is appreciated more now than it probably was previously.
I love that you pointed out. And so, because we talked about that, and that moment made that into the book, that he once threw 3 runners out at the plate in one game, which really is amazing from the outfield. That is truly incredible. And he was really a student of the game too. I mean, I understand that, he would read about the other teams, he would study it. He was pretty smart.
Yeah, I mean, anytime you get a player who can get on base as often as he did, that takes a lot of intelligence. You have to pick your spots. You have to know which pitchers are likely to walk you if you wait them out, if you're patient, and which are not going to. There's a lot that goes into that aspect of getting on base, and clearly he was a guy who made a career out of it, since he wasn't going to hit home runs.
Exactly. He used what he had, and he really was. The other thing I think really needs to be appreciated about him was how extraordinary he was for his time. He did not accept the limitations that people expected of people who were deaf at that time. Like, he was trained to cobble shoes, and his parents, who were wonderful people, and they loved him dearly, they always expected that he would stay at home. He would live at home like other deaf people live at home with their parents. He would cobble shoes. That would be his good life. And he wanted more. I mean, this idea of being a baseball player and going out and traveling on the road when you can't hear, I mean, that was a crazy idea. It was so crazy. He didn't even tell him when he went to try out for his first team. He went in that cobbling shop. He created his own cleats. He built his own cleats. He went out. He got his spot. And he was also a very proud person, because when the first manager wanted to pay him less because he was deaf, he goes, no. And he went on till somebody would pay him a fair price. And then later, after he became a star, that first manager wanted to get him back and was willing to pay him more. But as I understand it, he said to that guy, I wouldn't play for you for $1 million.
And it's amazing that he turned down a job because he wasn't making as much money as the other players. I mean, that really does show a lot of self-confidence. It's not only, obviously he had a good sense of right and wrong, but he was also taking a tremendous chance there that he was going to get another job, where he would make more money and perhaps get to play at a higher level. There's not much security in baseball. Generally, when you've got a job, especially when you're a relatively unproven player, as he was, you're usually going to take any job that's handed to you and at any price. And he wasn't willing to do that.
And I think it's just very extraordinary. He was a man with pride and as you said, and self-confidence. And so I really think a really good role model in that way. There was just so many things to admire about him, but I keep coming back also to his honesty, that people could trust him. Oh, and he also had a wonderful sense of humor, didn't he? Did he?
That's for sure.
He made some jokes about his deafness. There was, I forget, was it one of those that you were telling me about where he was? I didn't forget, it was you were telling me, or Steve Sandy was telling me that he was once at a hotel with the other players, and it was really, really noisy, and nobody could get any sleep, and everyone was exhausted the next day except for one player, one very well-rested player, and they come out walking the next day, and he writes on his notepad, since he wrote everything in his notepad, "Isn't it great to be deaf?" When I presented the book at the Mazda Museum in Findlay, Ohio, one of his relatives actually came by. Oh, and they really liked the book, which made me feel wonderful. And one of them showed me some of writings that he had written to family members. And evidently he had written to one family member that had a young child who had a new baby. And he said, well, if that's why I'm lucky that I'm deaf. The baby wouldn't kick me up. But, the other thing is he married a deaf woman, and a lot of people thought that deaf people couldn't live independently. He did, bought a farm, they lived independently. They had 3 hearing children. He adopted his nephew when his sister died, and he brought them all up, sent them all to college. The two girls became teachers. The son became a judge. The nephew became a baker. And he was very ingenious about adapting. He created a little thing over by his door so that when people knocked, a ball would fall on the floor and he would feel vibrations, right?
Yeah.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, and after he was done playing, thing that I learned later, he went to work for Goodyear in Akron, and they had a lot of deaf workers there. And they actually made him the director of deaf workers. He was helping the new deaf employees adjust to their jobs and do whatever they had to do to fit in and be able to do the jobs. And they formed a baseball team that they called the Goodyear Silence. And of course, he was the coach. He was too old to play at that point, but he actually coached the deaf players. And so, he really never stopped giving back and never stopped helping, other deaf people, just as his wife continued, to teach both signing and speaking to deaf people. There was one story that I read after his wife had taught him to speak a little bit when he was playing for that Louisville team, the team where they all learned sign language. And then all of a sudden he started speaking. And apparently a couple of the players started calling him Chatty instead of Donnie because he was talking so much.
I didn't know that one yet. That's a great one, Eric. Yeah, I love it. And I love that you're focused on how he kept giving back. And he had a long life in which he gave back because he lived 99 years. And to sort of put that in perspective, he lived from President Abraham Lincoln to the election of President John F. Kennedy.
Amazing.
Isn't that amazing? And there's actually, you can look up Cam Miller Films, C-A-M Miller, M-I-L-L-E-R Films on Twitter. He's got video of the 99-year-old William Hoy on the ball field being interviewed. So you can see the real guy and how small he is. He's next to his son, the judge, and his son is interpreting for him while he's being interviewed.
Because he was the oldest living ball player when he died.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, the oldest living ball player now is a guy named Eddie Robinson, who just turned 100. And when you think about it, the advances in healthcare between 1961 and now, over 60 years, have been so great that you might expect that maybe there will be lots of former ball players over 100, but there aren't. I mean, the oldest living ball player is basically the same age that William Hoy was 60 years ago when he was the oldest living ball player.
But it was unusual for a man who was born when Abraham Lincoln was president to live that long, because the lifespan was shorter then.
Exactly.
But I think he lived such a healthy life. I mean, he was just really, he was a very upstanding citizen. He had a healthy lifestyle. Even after he retired from baseball, he was like walking from his home to his son's courtroom. He just walked everywhere. He was always very active, busy, engaged. As you said, giving back well into old age. I think that's a kind of a formula for success. And I hope that's another thing that maybe the people at the National Baseball Hall of Fame will take into consideration. All that he gave back. I mean, I think he was a wonderful ball player. And as you said, they can measure his contributions in a better way now than maybe they did back then. But also character and giving back. I hope that's taken into consideration. You're already in the Hall of Fame, Eric. How would you feel about William Hoy joining you there?
Bring him on. That would be fantastic.
Yeah, that would be great. And I love how the language became a bridge. And whenever I share the book, and you've shared the book so much, and I want to thank you for that, Eric. You've done that so many summers, right?
Yeah, the Texas Rangers have a summer reading program. We suspended it last year because of COVID, and we're not sure whether we'll be able to do it this year or not. But I go to area libraries and read a few kids' books, usually with baseball themes, to groups of kids of all different ages. And my favorite book to read is the William Hoy story. It's got so much of a message in addition to being entertaining for the kids, and the drawings are great. They love them. it teaches the kids, never to count themselves out, never to say I can't. And it's really fun, reading that book. There's a couple of other ones I really love. There's one called Knuckleball Ned, which was written by a former big league pitcher named R.A. Dickey, which is about being different. It has a similar theme, but it's about being different and how there's nothing wrong with being different. And those two books together provide a tremendous lesson for kids. And I just love doing it and watching the kids' faces as I'm reading that book.
Oh, thank you so much. I mean, that is so important to me because, we are all different. I mean, no two people are exactly the same. And sometimes kids are so self-conscious about their differences, and they think their difference, they worry that it makes them lesser than. And I just hope that books and stories and people like this, people like this and books like that, remind them to cherish their differences, to see their differences as gifts. Your difference may be just what the world was waiting for. And your very difference is what you have to give to make things better for everybody. And since you mentioned the illustrations, I do want to mention that the illustrator here is Jez Tuya. And I'm so thrilled with what he did here. And one of the, amazing things about being a writer is the editor picks the illustrator. And of course, William Hoy, as we've talked about it, he's 19th century mostly, although he lived into the 20th century. So when this book was being planned out, I thought, oh, they'll probably go with kind of old-timey, grainy things that look more 19th century. And Jez Tuya, look what he did. It's bright, it's cheery. And as you said, Eric, the kids really enjoy it. It makes him seem contemporary, doesn't it?
It does. And there's something the way he drew William's friendly face, that's just tremendously endearing. He's an easy character for the kids to fall in love with.
Oh, thank you so much for saying that. And thank you for sharing it with the kids and all you do for kids. You do so much and you make reading exciting for them. I mean, they come in because they know you from baseball and they love baseball, and hearing you read and enjoy what you read, it turns them into readers. And I'm also so proud that William Hoy is making friends with kids in Japan. This is the Japanese version. And in Korea, where baseball is very popular in both those countries. And this is also fun to share. You probably have seen this many times. This is Eric. This is William Hoy's baseball card.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, kind of colorized. And this was a really special thing that my friend Steve Sandy showed me. This is a card, and if I can hold it up close, William Hoy is in the middle, and here's Connie, his friend Connie Mack, and his friend Clark Griffith, and see what they're doing with their hands? They're signing to each other. Now, as Eric, you pointed out, he taught his teammates to sign, and when they would get together in later years, they would sign. And isn't that kind of a cool thing? It's a wonderful language.
Yeah, and, in the case of baseball too, it wasn't just the umpires with the safe and out and the ball and strike signs. He was able to teach his teammates signs, which is very common now. You see the third base coach, doing all this stuff to tell the batter whether to bunt or tell the runner whether to steal. And they were the first ones to do that. And it actually gave them an advantage over their opponents because they were able to signal to each other on the field, which other teams yet hadn't figured out how to do. So he was kind of a pioneer in that regard as well.
Absolutely. And that's another example of your difference being your gift. So instead of seeing the deafness as something that, he saw it as a positive. Because of that, he knew sign language. Because of that, he could enrich the conversation with these signs. And these are a really fun thing for kids to learn. And that's another thing I always like to share. I'm not fluent with sign language, but we always have fun doing things like, this is mother, this is father, and this is grandmother. And if this is mother and this is father and this is grandmother, then I ask, can you do grandfather? And of course, the kids are so smart. They do grandfather. And we have fun doing teacher, because a teacher takes knowledge from his or her brain and gives it to you. And this is a person, teacher. And this is a book. and this is a book person, a librarian. And of course, one of the favorites is I have two cats, so this is a cat. And dog that's a dog.
Really?
You have dogs. Do you have dogs, Eric?
Yeah, we have one right now. Yeah.
Okay, so there you go. Now you know how to talk to your dog in sign language.
He's going to be talking to me in a second, looking for a walk. So
Oh, I bet.
I'll
So
give him a dog sign.
yes. So do you have any other stories you want to share about William Hoy?
I think I've covered just about everything that I wanted to make sure we said. I'm glad you talked about his kids. His kids were all very well educated. There was such a premium placed on education in his family, with his wife being a teacher and his daughters becoming teachers. And as you mentioned, he had been the valedictorian of the school for the deaf. So it was clearly a family that, placed a great value on education. So often, kids think in terms of being athletes, but not necessarily scholar athletes, if you will. Or, they dismiss the value of education because they think they're going to be a pro baseball player. And only a very small percentage of the kids who are great athletes in school are going to become professional athletes. So, it's another thing for kids to keep in mind that, if they are going to be successful, there are various routes to get there. And yeah, athletics is one, but the odds are pretty much stacked against you there. You got it shot, and if you practice a lot, but education is a more reliable path, and you should make sure that you follow that path as well.
Mhm.
And not only is that true, everything you said, absolutely true, but even if you were to succeed as an athlete and look at, and education still enriches your life. I mean, William Hoy was a professional player for 14 years, but he had a lot of years to live after that. And because he had an education is something to enjoy reading, to enjoy understanding, to enjoy making connections. This enriches your life. I mean, look at you, Eric. You've made your life in baseball as an announcer, and you have written a book too. Do you have that to show us, your limerick book?
Where is that book?
And also, you love music. I mean, there's always, there's Eric's book. He's a writer.
We call it Limerick. The word Eric happens to be in the word limerick, so
Isn't that wonderful?
we called it. And it's an illustrated book too. It's not necessarily a kid's book, but I read selected limericks to kids at the library readings too.
But don't you, I mean, I just think education enriches everybody's life. You don't know what you're going to end up being, but even the thing you're going to end up being may not be what you are your whole life. And even if that's what you are, education is just loving to read. Books can be your friends. They are always there to turn to because things are not always going to go right, even in your chosen career. I always love this in baseball. They say somebody is successful. I mean, wow, isn't it incredible if they've got a 300 batting average? That means they've missed 7 out of 10 times, right? And you know what? Doesn't feel good on those times you miss, does it? So it's nice to have other things that are going on in your heart and your mind to get you through the slumps and all of that. Yes?
Yeah, the value of books it's undeniable, and the earlier kids start appreciating that, the better off they're going to be. I remember in first grade, the teacher saying at the start of the year, we're going to break a record for our school this year. We are going to read 7 books this year. And they weren't kids' books, they were actual books. And so it was instilled in me really early, the value of reading and the joy of reading. If the books are selected well, the kids are going to really take a liking to it early. I would imagine that's probably pretty important. You go back and ask kids what were the first books that you read and how much that colors their perception of reading for the rest of their lives.
Well, absolutely. And it certainly would be my honor if there are any kids out there who are listening to you read or they had their parents or teachers, sharing this with them. And if that made them excited about reading, that would be the best. That's certainly what I'm hoping for. And I'm also hoping it will inspire kids to want to write to the National Baseball Hall of Fame. Wouldn't that be awesome?
There you go, for sure.
Yeah, let's get him in there. And I just want to say, Eric, I am so grateful to you because this was my very first book. I was not yet a published book writer, and you were just absolutely encouraging, supportive. I can't remember how many times I went to you with more questions and questions on the question. You know, you give me an answer and I have another question, and you were so patient and so encouraging, and really lifted me up as you lift so many people up all the time. And I just want to say thank you.
Well, thanks. You're welcome. You did a wonderful job with it. Very proud to be associated with this book.
Indeed. Well, thank both of you. This has been delightful. Susan, every time we have a story time, it gets better and better. And Eric, your presence today added so much more to what we're doing. We certainly appreciate your being here. I was struck by comments that you made, both of you made earlier, about the power of reading. Eric, you were talking about going to the libraries or rooms and reading to the kids and how attentive they were. And Nancy, I know in several of your books, there's an emphasis on the power of words. And obviously your words, both written and spoken, and yours too, Eric, have tremendous impact. And I want to thank you both. I'd also like to take a brief moment to recognize two other people who were in the studio with us. Toni Portman is a director of Air for Arts, and she's also the CEO of Walkabout Workplace, which is the platform that we're using for all of these presentations. And Toni, delighted to have you with us. Gary Gronquist was here, and Gary is a supporter of Air for Arts and a good friend of Susan and mine's. So I want to thank all of you. Susan, I don't know what to add to today's terrific sessions.
No, I echo everything you said about today's conversation. Fantastic. Both of you, thank you all. And a shout out to our audience, both here and also wherever you may be watching this presentation. And thank you for being here. I do want to mention where Nancy's books are available. They are at Interbang Books in Dallas, Barnes & Noble, Albert Whitman and Company, and Lerner Publishing Group. Also, of course, your website that's at nancychurnin.com to explore and get some more information. And by the way, Eric, I'm looking forward. I want to get a copy of your book, Limerick.
It's great.
Really look forward to that. So, and I want to mention next month that Nancy will present for Spacious Skies, the story of Catherine Lee Bates, who wrote the poem that became the song America the Beautiful. This is going to be, I know, another wonderful session as well. So again, thank you all so much. And I encourage all of you out there to please go to our Air for Arts website. That's Air, A-I-R, for number 4, arts, ARTS.org, for details about upcoming Storytime presentations and all the other activities that Air for Arts is engaged. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
To be here. And this thank you in sign language. So thank you.
Thank you, Eric.
Take care.